What's up, guys?
Hey everybody.
Welcome to another video for a weekly video for Travel Therapy Mentors. Normally this is on Sundays, but this past Sunday we were in Germany and at an Airbnb that didn't have the greatest internet connection, so we pushed it back until we got to Krakow, Poland today. So we've got a good Wi-Fi connection here, so hopefully we'll be able to go through this video. We're going to be talking about licensing today, how to get licensed in different states, what the process is like. It's a question we get very commonly, and it's also one of the more frustrating things about travel therapy, in my opinion.
Definitely.
So it'll be a good topic to cover tonight, and hopefully we can shed some light on that for you guys.
Yeah, so we Jared's going to get this video shared in a couple groups so more people can join in with us this evening, and I'll give some introductions for anybody who may not be familiar with us. So my name is Whitney Aiken.
And I'm Jared Kazaza.
And we are both traveling physical therapists. And as Jared said, we do weekly videos every week about different travel therapy topics.
I think we're at like over 6 months in a row now of weekly videos. So
that's hard to believe.
That's hard to believe, especially with the last over 2 months of traveling now. So
yeah. So we run a site, Travel Therapy Mentor, and a lot of you guys may already be familiar with that, but some of you guys may be watching for the first time tonight, so welcome. We've been traveling PTs for about 4 years, and we have a personal blog. It's called Fifth Wheel Physical Therapist. And then we started a business website called Travel Therapy Mentor, where we write more specifically about these different kind of ins and outs of travel therapy, how to learn how to become a travel therapist, and how to deal with tricky situations as a therapist. And like Jared said, licensing is a big thing that we get a lot of questions about. Right now, especially with it being summer and a lot of people having graduated just in May, and a lot of people are getting licensed for the first time. And so we've just gotten so many questions about how do I go about, the licensing and getting my next license after my first license and all that kind of stuff. So we want to answer some of your questions about that tonight. As Jared sort of alluded to, we are in Krakow, Poland. Right now we're traveling abroad for fun for 4 months. We get a lot of questions too about whether we're traveling for work. We're not working out of the country right now. We're just traveling for fun around Europe, which is a huge perk of travel therapy as a career choice, because it gives us the flexibility to be able to travel and go places for fun and take additional time off. So this week we're in Poland, and next week we'll be in the Czech Republic.
Yeah, so we're very lucky to do this. It's been a really cool trip, and I'm actually really excited to be moving into Eastern Europe a little bit. We've been in Western Europe for the last 2 months, and Eastern Europe seems like it's going to be a lot more laid back, a lot lower cost, which is going to be great. So should be fun. I think we've got a month and a half left on the trip. So
yeah, we've passed our halfway point on our trip, which is crazy. I forgot to announce that. So we've been gone since May, and it's July now. So we're going to jump in and start talking about tonight's topic. I do see that a few of you are tuning in live. So hi, Lauren, and hi, George. If anybody else is on, if you want to say hey to us in the comments, just drop us a comment below. Also, if you're watching later, hi, Naya. If you're watching later on the replay, if you want to say hey and let us know that you watched, we would love to hear from you. We love to hear from our followers and our viewers. Hi, George. Yeah, Poland. We're super excited. This is our first day. We didn't really do much today, but yeah, we're super excited about Krakow. It's supposed to be a really cool city.
Yeah, it's been really cool so far.
Let's talk a little bit about licensing as a travel therapist or as a therapist in general, because we get this question from some perm therapists that are just moving states sometimes too. So how does it work? That's the biggest thing we get is, if you're a travel therapist and you move around for work, do you have to get licensed in every new state? The answer, unfortunately, is yes. You have to hold a license in every state that you work in. There are a few exceptions to this. There's a couple states that will let you work under like a provisional license while you're working on getting your regular license, and there's a couple circumstances, I think, where you might be able to work somewhere without being licensed there. Like if it was for example, I think when there was like the wildfires in California, or there's some kind of like major emergency, like I think you can work in certain states without a license. But for the most part, across the board, you're going to have a license in each and every state that you want to work in. So we want to talk a little bit about how it works to go about getting these licenses and kind of the order of operations of how you would do this, especially if you're someone who's planning to travel to several different states but you don't know where you want to travel yet. So the first license that you get, this is the question that we're getting a lot right now, because like I said, a lot of new grads right now are getting their very first license. And a lot of them are learning about this process. Usually the very first license you get is awarded to you or given to you through examination. So it's called license by examination, which means that the time that you go to take your board exam, again, we're PTs, so I'm most familiar with the way the PT process works. But the time you go to take your board exam, you apply for your initial license, and it's contingent upon you passing your board exam. So for example, for us, in Virginia, in our schools in Virginia, we were able to take the boards early. We were able to take the boards in April, and we didn't graduate till May. So back in, February, March, April is when we started applying for our Virginia license, and we had everything, all the paperwork in and everything, and then they sent us a letter that says, we have your application, but we're pending your license until we get your exam scores and your final transcripts. So it wasn't until we took the boards in April and passed, and then graduated and got our final transcripts in May, that we were actually given our license. But for that process, pretty much as soon as they get your transcripts, you're licensed like right away. So hopefully if you are a new grad and you're getting your initial license, you get that first license right away after you graduate if you took boards right away. Now, there's a lot of people right now in this cohort of PT students I know that are not taking their exam until July. So they don't obviously get licensed till after July, but again, hopefully it should be very fast after you take that exam. If there's anybody else that's tuning in that's not of a PT discipline, if you want to let us know if that's different for your discipline. I know it's slightly different for SLP because I know they have to do their CCC, what is it called?
It's not an internship, but
I'm blanking. I know what this is called. I'm sorry, SLPs. Their fellowship year, CFY, their CFY year. So I know that for SLPs it's a little bit different but I think you're still licensed in your first, when you initially graduate. But anyway, I think for PT and PTA and OT and CODA, it's all pretty similar. So your first license is called license by exam, and that's the one that you should get very first after you graduate.
And for that first license, we almost always recommend getting that license in your home state, the state that you're going to have as your tax home. There's a couple reasons for that. One, you're probably going to want to be licensed in that state anyway. There's, I would say it's a minority of people that want to completely leave their home state right away, either as a permanent therapist or as a travel therapist. There's people that want to try out different states, which is a great part about travel, but I think very few people are just completely dead set on not living in their state. Some are, but I think it's always good to get licensed in your home state first. One reason is that if it's your home state and you have your tax home there, then you're going to need to be back home somewhere around 30 days a year, give or take, or maybe a little bit more. And because of that, during that time, you might want to have a PRN job in that area. Like, so say you want to spend a whole month at home with family, and during that time, you're going to work 10 or 20 hours a week just to supplement income a little bit. So it's great to have an ability to do that, a license in that state, so that you can get a PRN job. The other thing is that we think it's a good idea, especially as a new grad, traveling like we did, to stay close to home on your first contract. A big reason for that is because it's expensive to move across the country. So say you're from Virginia like us, if we wanted to move all the way to California, we had no money as new grads. We would have had to basically be using credit card debt to get to California to start our first job. And I don't think that sets you off on a good foot. So it doesn't, I guess some reasons why you might not do this would be, say that your state doesn't have a lot of travel jobs. So a state like Utah, let's see, what other states?
But then again, I think
Idaho.
Utah is part of the compact, so you would benefit, which we'll talk about for the PTs anyway.
We'll talk about the compact. But there's some states that have very, very few travel jobs where it might not benefit you to get licensed in your home state. But for most people, get licensed in your home state and try to find a job there to save some money, I think is a great way to start out travel. Let you build some confidence, still be close to home, you're still relatively familiar. Because a lot of people, what we find is they move across the country on their first job, everything's brand new. So you're working as a clinician for the first time, you're in a whole new state, all new coworkers, everything's different. And sometimes that can be too much. So depending on you as a person, I think it's probably a good idea to ease yourself into those changes.
There's also a lot of risk in taking your first job all the way across the country. What if you put in all the money to move out there and all this, and then you get canceled, and then you're having a really bad first experience as a traveler, and you're in the hole with money. So there's just a lot of reasons that we really recommend that you not only get your first license in your home state, but also try to take your first job in your first state.
So George said he did it completely different than that. What did you do, George? Where did you get your first license? Did you move across the country? So I know that you, I don't know if you started traveling as a new grad, but I know that you started as a PTA later in life. So maybe you were more willing to jump out and go for it because you're used to living on your own, whereas we were kind of nervous about going for it right away. Hey, Mom. Thanks for joining.
Hi, Lisa. George says, I was dead set to leave Pennsylvania, and my first traveling assignment was in Washington State. Yeah. So, George, was your first job as a PTA a travel job, or did you work perm before going out? Because a lot of this, too, is like a ton of the new grads that we're talking to, it's like not only their first travel job, but it's their first job, period, because they're starting as new grads. So I don't know. We just think that like getting your first license in your home state is the easiest thing to do. And then for people that want to start work immediately after becoming licensed, we're going to get into talking about getting your second license in a minute, and you'll understand why it's easiest to take your first job if you're going to start working right away in that first state that you're licensed in, because otherwise you're going to have to wait longer to go ahead and get a second license.
Yeah, and it depends a lot, but for people that have very little money as a new grad and things like that, it's never a bad idea to stay close to home, save some money first, but yeah, it's up to you as an individual for sure.
Yeah. So George says, New York was my first license. I was 28 when I started traveling, and I went straight into travel. So how many states did you get licensed in up front, George? Because that's another thing we're going to talk about is kind of the path that different travel therapists take as far as like getting a bunch of licenses all at once, just getting one at a time. But we're getting ahead of ourselves a little bit. So a little bit more about new grads getting their first license. I've also had some other people talk about like if they say you went to school in a different state than is your home state, so that becomes a tricky situation. So you kind of have to think about where you want your home base to be and where you're going to have your tax home. So maybe you went to school in Massachusetts, but you're from New Jersey. You just kind of have to decide, am I ever going to go back to Massachusetts? The other thing is, just because you sit for the exam, like in the state that you're living in at the time, like wherever you're going to school, you don't have to, I'm pretty sure you don't have to apply for a license in that same state as you take your exam. You can get your first license in Alaska if you want and take the exam in New Jersey. It doesn't matter. So George says he got 4 licenses right up front. So we'll talk about that here in a little bit. But yeah, so it's kind of a personal choice, but we had good success with getting our very first license in our home state, and we've always kept that license. So Virginia is home for us. We've always had that first license, and we don't plan to get rid of it. But it's up to you. If you know you're never going to work in that state, you're never going to go back there, you're like, George, screw Pennsylvania, I'm out of here, then, you know.
Yeah, and also a big factor is how many jobs are available in that home state, because for us, we're lucky. There's almost always jobs in Virginia, so if we ever want to be close to home, we can almost always find something within a couple hours that's a travel assignment. Mm-hmm. So it's good for us to have that. But yeah, if we lived in a state that didn't have a lot of travel jobs, then we might have gone a completely different route.
Yeah. And then again, kind of reiterating, but where should I take my first travel job is a huge question we're getting right now. Again, very personal choice, but we felt most comfortable taking our first travel job in our home state, close to home, and not packing up and moving like all the way to Alaska, for example. We had an offer in Alaska, and we were like, that's just too much.
Yeah, I would say there's 2 main ways to look at that. Either one, take it in your home state so that you're close to home, and you can save some money. The other thing would be, if you're not going to do that, probably take the first job in a state that has a lot of jobs so that you have a lot of options on your first contract. So getting licensed somewhere like California, where you might have 100 job options to pick from, and make sure that you get a good job as your first job, it's probably very important as well.
And then even if you got licensed in California and somehow that first one didn't work out, you would already be out there, but you would know there's a good chance that another contract is going to come up.
Yeah.
Whereas if you went somewhere like Alaska or something, another job may or may not come up.
Yeah, that's something to consider, because sometimes these states have, like, especially big states. So a state like Alaska might have, let's say, 8 for the whole state, 8 jobs. And that's a massive state. So they might be 300 miles apart each job. And if your contract gets canceled, the chances of finding another job in that area might not be very, very high. Whereas in California, say you take a job in Central California, if your job gets canceled, there's a pretty good chance you'll find something within an hour of where that prior job was.
Right. So that's a little bit about your first license. So we want to talk about next, that one was called your first license is license by exam. Any subsequent license that you get after that, a lot of people ask, how do I transfer my license to a new state? So the truth is you don't actually transfer it so much. Like it's not like you give up your first license and move it to a new state. You just get another one. So subsequent license, it's called license by endorsement, which means that the new state you're getting licensed in is having to be, basically your application is endorsed by the previous state. So Virginia, for example, our first state vouches for us or endorses our license to go ahead and get licensed in a new state, which means they say that you're in good standing and all that good stuff.
Yep.
So the process of licensing by endorsement can be rather complicated. So we want to talk about how that works.
It depends on the state, and it depends on how many prior licenses you have. Which is, so like George said, he was licensed in 4 states to start with. So there's pros and cons of that. We were licensed in 1 state to start with. So a benefit of getting licensed in multiple states to start with is that when you get licensed in each of those states and you're only licensed in 1 or none to start with, so say in George's example, he got licensed in Pennsylvania as a home state and then got licensed in the other 4 states. That means that for those other 4 states, he only has to get verification from Pennsylvania for each of those states when he applies. Whereas if he did those in succession, so Pennsylvania and then the other 4, by the time he gets to that 5th state, he has to get license verification from all 4 of the other states. Does that make sense? So
yeah.
they have to verify that you're licensed in good standing in each state that you're licensed in. Mm-hmm. So that's a benefit of doing multiple at the same time. The downside of that is, say you get licensed in 4 states to start with, there's almost no way you're going to work in all 4 of those states in that first year, which means that you're going to get a license in a state that you're not going to work in, and you're going to have to renew that license. So basically, you're spending money on a license that you're not going to use for that first year, and you'll probably have to renew and pay extra money. So that's a downside. The other downside is that you have to keep up with CEUs for all those different states.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, kind of like the classic example, if you want to think about it this way, if you wanted to get licensed in all 50 states, when you got licensed in the 50th state, you would have to get verifications from all 49 other states. So you'd have to get a piece of paper from every other state, or hopefully electronic.
Well, it's not sent to you, it's sent to the board. So,
sometimes.
Well, yeah.
Sometimes they send it to you.
It depends.
It's complicated.
But, so yeah, say you got licensed, the very last state was Massachusetts or something. Every other state has to send evidence that you're licensed in good standing with their state to that very last state. So not only does that take forever, but it's also really costly because each of these states usually charge you somewhere between, $20 and $50 to send that verification. So if it's, if you're licensed in 20 states or 10 states or whatever, that can add up quickly.
So George says,
never licensed in PA.
He was never licensed in Pennsylvania. He got his first one in New York. So did you apply, George? Did you apply for New York first and then the other 3, or did you apply for them all at the same time?
Yeah, I'm not really sure how that would work. If you can apply for 4 all together as your first state.
Probably not, because
maybe.
all together is as your first state, you have to do just one. But
yeah, I think.
Hey,
Ryan.
Hi Ryan, thanks for tuning in. So let's talk about what the process is typically for all your subsequent licenses. So typically there's an application. And when you pick the application from their website or whatever, you want to pick the one that says licensed by endorsement. So we'll use our example. The first one was Virginia. We got licensed by exam. The second one was Massachusetts. So we go to Massachusetts website and we pick the application that says licensed by endorsement. Sometimes it's electronic. Sometimes you print it off old school and mail it in. So there's usually an application. There's usually a fee. So they just want your money. Typically, some states have what's called a jurisprudence exam, which is a state exam about their laws. Sometimes these are super easy. Like I think North Carolina and Virginia was just like
I'm
like
not sure Virginia
book.
even had one, but
it's like an open book thing you just fill out on the application. Like you just look at the laws and then you answer 10 questions A through D, and then you just turn it in at the same time. Now there's
easy.
some states that are super complicated.
Yeah, so states like the ones we know of are California, Arizona, Florida, all require that you actually go to a testing center to take a exam on their laws, and those can be pretty difficult. I know that when we got licensed in Arizona, I was very nervous. That test was a lot harder than I was anticipating, and I was like, oh, man, I should have studied more. I probably failed that, and I've heard that California is even harder. We haven't got licensed there yet, but make sure that you definitely study for those harder
Right.
exams. The ones that you have to go to a testing center are no joke.
Yeah, so it means you actually have to go to like a parametric testing center, just the same way you did for your board exam, and like sit for an actual test about their laws. So sometimes there's a jurisprudence exam, but not always. Sometimes there's fingerprinting. So again, California and Arizona both require fingerprinting. And that can be a pain in the butt to get done out of the state, because you basically have to get the fingerprints done at like your local law enforcement agency or something.
Yeah, you go to the sheriff's department and try to get fingerprints. It's
And then you have to mail them in. So I had to do my Arizona ones, and they like didn't do a very good job with my prints. And it's one sheet of paper. You only get one try. And so then I had to snail mail them to Arizona, and then Arizona writes back and says,
these aren't good enough.
these aren't
Do
good
it
enough.
again.
So then they had to mail me a new piece of paper. So I had to wait for that. Then I had to go get fingerprinted again, and then I had to mail it back to them. So it took forever.
Yeah.
I know in California, if you are in the state of California when you're applying for the license, which isn't usually the case, you can get this live scan thing done, which is like a digital fingerprinting, which is a lot easier. So if you have the possibility to actually go to the state of California and get that done, it's nice. But if not, you have to again do the snail mail
Yep.
ink
And
prints.
so these issues pop up. So like Whitney said with her Arizona license, where she had to do fingerprinting twice, that ended up taking a lot longer than we were anticipating. So something similar happened, an issue with my Massachusetts license. So Whitney and I sent our applications together, sent all of our information together. Somehow, they attached one of my papers to her application, which meant that hers got processed. And her license number was showing online and everything. Everything was great. She got her license in the mail. And I'm like, okay, so mine should be any day now. We wait like 2 or 3 weeks, it doesn't come in. So I called them and they're like, oh, you're missing a paper from your application. And I was like, well that's weird, because I sent it together with someone else that has already gotten licensed. And so what they found out that happened is they attached one of my papers to a different...
Yeah, it was like ours were like paper clipped together basically.
Yeah.
So she went to the filing cabinet, found mine.
And then found my paper in there, and then issued the license basically right away. But if we had a job lined up that was waiting on us to start, that would have been a disaster.
Yeah.
Which goes into another thing that
Yeah.
we tell everyone.
We'll get into that in just a minute. We got a
Okay.
few more things to talk about, but so kind of just again going through the basics of how this works. Application, fee, sometimes a jurisprudence exam, sometimes fingerprinting, sometimes a background check, maybe, and then the verifications from other states. Now again, sometimes this can be done online. It kind of depends, not necessarily on the state you're applying to, but the state you need verification from. So even if Massachusetts, where I'm applying to, has everything electronic, if Virginia is still old school and I need to get a verification from Virginia, I might still have to go and mail a paper and mail a check to Virginia and say, will you please send this to Massachusetts? Or I think for Illinois, it was like, I had to get Virginia to send it to me, and then I had to put the Virginia one and the North Carolina one and the Massachusetts one and the application and the fee and the everything in a paper, and then mail that to Illinois.
Yeah, every state is different, and that is
Yeah.
probably the biggest hassle that we've run into with traveling is getting licensed.
Right.
And that is a big reason why we don't have a lot of licenses.
Right.
We know a lot of, we've been traveling for 4 years, and we know a lot of other travelers that have been traveling similar or less that have twice as many licenses as us. So we've only gotten 5. And the big reason for that is because it's such a hassle each time.
Yeah.
So,
So, application fee, jurisprudence, fingerprinting sometimes, verifications from other states, sometimes your original school transcripts, and sometimes your original board exam results. So even if you've been practicing for 20 years and you go to get a license in a new state, they might still need your original transcripts. This means that if you're...
your official transcripts too.
Yeah,
So you
official
can't just print them offline. You have to contact the school and have them send it directly in a sealed envelope. It's kind of ridiculous.
And then, and also sometimes your original board score. So this could mean that you've been a career PT for 30 years. Say you're still a bachelor's PT and you have to go all the way back to your undergrad and get a transcript from your bachelor's to get a new license in a new state, or a master's PT or whatever. So yes, sometimes that, I don't know if all states require that, but I think everyone that we've done.
Yeah, all that we know of.
So that's kind of the old school way of doing it, and that's how most are still done.
So George said he got his New York license first and then transferred to the other 3 states. So that's I think that's the way you have to do it. So you'd have one that you get by exam, and then the other ones are by endorsement. So I don't think you can apply for 4 up front right away. You'd have to choose a state to get your first license, and that would be the one that transfers to the other states. Lauren says that Kentucky is very easy for their jurisprudence exam. So we've never looked into Kentucky at all, but it's definitely
That's good to know.
Yeah, good information.
And then George also wants to add to my list of things a passport photo and getting things notarized.
Yeah, so sometimes for some states they'll need a passport photo, and almost always you need stuff notarized, right?
Yeah, it just maybe.
I think
What do you need notarized? I don't remember. Maybe just the application itself. Yeah, so sometimes you have to like go and find a notary, which you can usually find at like your local bank, or sometimes if you're at a hospital, they'll have a notary available on staff. We've usually used a bank. It's a good idea. This is sort of a side note. If you are a traveler who's, let's say you're out of state, have a national bank. Have a national bank.
Something like Chase or Wells Fargo that has a lot of branches, because it's really, really nice to be able to go to one of those branches and have someone notarize things for you when you need it. Or
one time I went to one, there was a local bank that I didn't have an account with, and the guy was really nice, and he was like, you're thinking about opening an account, aren't you? And so I was like, yeah, I am. And so because I said that, he didn't charge me to do the notary services, even though I wasn't a member of their bank. So that's just something to think about. And again, you kind of have to do this during like business hours,
Which is, so all of this to say that probably limit how many licenses you get.
Yeah.
Make sure before you get any license. So we've talked to a lot of travelers at this point, and a lot of people will just get licensed right away in states that they want to go to without looking at job prospects or anything about those states. And that is a big mistake. So always, before you get licensed in a state, check with either a recruiter or experienced travelers or someone about how many jobs are usually available in whatever state you're interested in. Because so somewhere like Utah, we have been traveling for 4 years. We have never seen a job in Utah. So if you got licensed there because you want to go, we would love to go there, but there's not jobs there. So you don't want to get licensed in that state and have to renew that license just hoping that a job pops up. So especially going through all that hassle. And then, like we talked about earlier, once you have that license, you have to get that verified with each new license. So that's an additional state that you have to contact every single time. So just be very mindful before you get licensed in a state. Don't just do it haphazardly.
Yeah, so as you can tell from this process, there's just a lot of moving parts that go into getting a license. It's not just the application. You have to maybe wait on these verifications from the other states. Maybe you were waiting on your board results to come in to even later in life when you have to get the board results sent in later. Or maybe you're waiting on your original transcripts from your school. So there's a lot of moving parts. And it's pretty complicated. So you can kind of go the route that George did and just get a few up front, and then you have to worry about maintaining those licenses, like renewing them and paying the fees and keeping up with the CUs and stuff, but then you don't have to do all the verifications. Or you can wait and just make sure to only get licensed in 1 or 2 states that you actually plan to go to soon, within the next few months, and then just do one at a time the way we did.
Yeah, and real quick before we keep going, if you guys are enjoying this video, please like and comment. The more engagement we get here, the more people see this, and the less people make mistakes that we made early on, which is always a great thing.
Yeah, so we got to spread the knowledge, guys. So a lot of people always want to know, do the travel therapy companies help you with the licensing process, or do they cover the license for you? So that's a really good question, and it just depends on the travel company. There are certain companies that will help you and take care of the majority of this headache for you, but there's only so much that, even those companies that offer to do that for you, there's only so much that they can do on your behalf. So you have to still, under most circumstances, even if the company helps you with it, you still have to fill out the application. They can't fill out the application for you. They might pay the fees for you, like they might pay the fee up front for you. They might be able to do the calling around and get your verifications for you if you sign like a waiver that says that they're allowed to call on your behalf. So we've had one company
Twice.
do that for us before.
And it was really helpful because that whole process of going to the board website and figuring out all the requirements and getting everything in order can be time consuming. So especially while you're on assignment. and why you might be looking for jobs in that state at the same time. So you've got a lot going on almost always as a traveler. So it's nice if you're working with a company that will help you out with that. That was really invaluable for us when we were getting licensed in Arizona. So
yeah. So that, and they really helped like stay on top of the timeline and that sort of thing. And they would kind of have like a checklist, because sometimes it's confusing. Like you can print off the checklist yourself from the website, but sometimes it's like, I don't know, like, did I forget to do this? Did I forget to do this? So it's nice to have someone check behind you and say, hey, you need to do this, this, and this.
And these are people that are familiar with this whole licensing process. So a lot of times recruiters or these companies will have inside knowledge about the state licenses and how to move things along more quickly. So there's like some insider knowledge about each state, about what's the easiest way to contact them to be like, hey, how's my application going? Because when you contact them and you're able to talk to someone, usually they'll push it along a little quicker. But sometimes it's almost impossible to contact them by phone, or they'll never answer by email. Or some states, it's weird, they'll answer like Twitter or Facebook messages before they'll answer like emails or calls. It's really strange, but there's like this insider knowledge that sometimes companies and recruiters will have that we don't have as just individuals.
But the good thing an important thing to know is a lot of times the travel companies won't do this for you unless you're already a current traveler of theirs, because they kind of have to know that you have something invested with them before they are going to stick their neck out and put a lot of money out there for you. So if you're a brand new traveler and you've never worked with this company before, they're probably not going to pay upfront costs for you and help you with this stuff.
Yeah, it's almost always while you're on contract, which is another great reason to get licensed in your home state, take a job there, and then while you're on assignment, ask if the company will help you get licensed in the next state you want to go to. So then you have money saved, you have your feet wet with travel, you're probably a lot less intimidated about moving to a new location, and then you might have some help with licensing. So I think that is a very good route to go.
Yeah, so that's how we've done it in the past when we've gotten the help with the licensing, and it was really awesome. Now, in other circumstances, travel companies will often reimburse you for the costs after the fact. So say you went ahead and got the license on your own, you went through all the process, and you take a job with that company, usually they'll reimburse you the cost of a license. So they didn't help you with the process and the headache of it, but they did help you with the cost of it if you take a job with them.
Yep.
So that's something to know. So we sort of have kind of alluded to this, but like there can be a lot of delays that can happen. Like I said, there's a lot of moving parts, and you really have to stay on top of it. You have to make a checklist, stay on top of the licensing board, calling them, emailing them, and making sure, because a lot of times, like Jared said, like our was it the Massachusetts one that I got mine in like 4 weeks, but his took like 6.
Or it was longer than that.
Or longer than that. So if we hadn't stayed on top of it, we might not have ever gotten the license.
If I hadn't contacted them, I would probably still be waiting on that license 3 years later. So
yeah. So that brings us to our next question. How long does it take to get a license? And this varies highly, depending on the state, depending on your discipline. So I had posted a question earlier in our Travel Therapy Mentors Facebook group to try to get some feedback, and I posted our timelines for how long it took us in different states. But it kind of depends on when you consider the timeline. So Virginia, that was our first one. We got licensed by exam. We pretty much got it right after graduation, but we started that process way before, like a couple months before ever taking the exam. So kind of a couple months if you look at it that way, but we were just waiting on examination and graduation. Other states, it sort of depends. So you have to think about the time that you actually go to the website and print off the application. If that's day one, it's taking a lot longer versus the day that they actually receive your application with all your verifications and stuff. So sometimes, we'll say it takes like 4 weeks or 6 weeks or 2 months, because from the time that you actually start looking into it, print off the application, start gathering your verifications from all these different places, it might take 2 months, but from the time that they actually receive your application on their desk, it might only take a week.
Yeah. And some of this also depends on the state itself, because states they have everything set up differently. So some states, as soon as they get an application, they start the whole process. Some states only meet at certain times of the year, so it might be once a month. So if you apply, say, 5 days before the meeting, then maybe it only takes you a week to get licensed. But if you apply right after the meeting happened, it might take 4 or 5 weeks. So some of it can almost be just luck about when you apply. and how the state works and when they're meeting and all those things.
Yeah. The other thing is, like, if you have to take a jurisprudence exam at a testing center, that's going to delay or speed up the process depending on when you can actually get in to take the test. When we got licensed in Arizona, we just didn't have a testing center nearby. The closest one was like 60 miles away. So we had to wait until we had a free Saturday that they had available at the testing center. So our application for Arizona got delayed by like a month because we just couldn't get to a testing center.
Yep.
Whereas some people have gotten their Arizona license a lot quicker than we did. I think ours took 3 months, and it's only supposed to take maybe 6 to 8 weeks. So there's just a lot of moving parts and a lot that goes into it.
Yeah.
So the question of how long it takes, for any PTs that are tuning in right now, I do have a rough list that I got from one of our wonderful recruiters that has sort of a rough outline of how long it takes for each state for PTs. So if you're interested in that, if you want to just comment below, and I can message you after the video and send you the list, because it basically lists out, like, roughly Virginia 3 to 5 weeks, and then California 2-3 months, whatever, and then actually has like a link to the website to take you to get more information, and that's kind of helpful just to have as like an overview. Sorry for the OTs and the SLPs, I don't have that resource for you guys.
Yeah, if you want that list, just do like hashtag license list or something like that in the comments. We'll send it to you.
Yeah. Okay, so
one thing before we go to the compact, we want to talk about that, but this is a question we get a lot in regards to how many how many licenses to get up front? What else?
What?
How many licenses to get up front? How many? I can't remember what I was gonna say.
Were you gonna talk about this part, about like the timeline?
Yeah.
So that.
We already talked about
When
that.
to start working on the next license.
Oh yeah. Okay, so I remember what it was. So we've run into situations where travelers will apply for jobs. So if you've listened to any of our videos before, we've talked about this in the past. We'll run into situations where travelers will apply for a job and get accepted for a job before they ever start the licensing process. And it seems to be fairly common procedure in the travel world, but we really think that's a big mistake. And we've seen this firsthand, how it ends up going wrong for not a lot of people, but it does go wrong sometimes. We had a situation in particular where we were working at these clinics in North Carolina, and another traveler we didn't know was supposed to start there. And so we're like, the clinic is ready for him to start. We're ready for him to start. The previous traveler left, so there's a whole open caseload with no one to cover it. And then the day that he's supposed to start, we hear that the license didn't go through in time, and he won't be starting until the next week. Well, long story short, it ended up getting pushed back 2 weeks, which basically was a disaster for the clinics, for us as travelers, because then we had to cover an entire extra caseload on top of ours. We had to, it was also a disaster for the patients, because they're like, oh, I thought this new guy was coming. So now they went from a prior traveler that was there to working with us, to working with a new traveler. So it's just bad for everyone when that happens. And like we were talking about before, stuff happens that you can't anticipate. So like your application gets stapled to someone else's application. You can't anticipate. So it's supposed to be a quick license, 2 weeks. Okay, I'll get this job that's supposed to start in 3. I'll have plenty of time. But you never know what will happen. So we always recommend get the license first and then get a job. Because if that happens and you miss 2 or 3 whole weeks of work, that's a lot of money missed. And a lot of people they'll argue that they don't want to pay for the license up front because then they might not find a job in that state. So instead they'd rather find a job first, which I completely understand. I don't want to waste money either. But you waste a lot more money in a situation where the license doesn't go through in time and you miss a lot of work.
Yeah.
That could be the difference between the license might cost you $200 total. But if you miss 2 weeks of work, you might lose $3,000. So it's not worth the stress on the facility and everyone else there, the patients, everything, but it's also not worth the risk of you losing that much money.
Yeah, so that's a huge thing. Again, a lot of people don't agree with us. A lot of people will apply for jobs and then get the license afterwards. They're like, oh, it's a quick license state, but just because it's a quick license state doesn't mean that you might have a slow verification from another state. So maybe Tennessee, I think, is one of the quick license states. Maybe Tennessee, the board is super fast. but maybe all your verifications from all your 10 other licenses isn't super fast, and maybe your school transcripts aren't super fast.
We've heard of this specifically about Hawaii. So people that are licensed in Hawaii say their first or second job was Hawaii, and then Hawaii has to send their verification to every new state. Apparently, Hawaii is very slow with sending out those verifications. So even if you're going to a state that's supposed to be a quick license, Hawaii might take a month to send the verification. So then, even if it would have only been a week, now it's 4 or 5 weeks. So there's so many things that can happen in all those, we made that list of all the different things that have to go right to get the license. One of those things goes wrong, and then the whole process is slower than you would have anticipated.
Yeah. So just to kind of recap, like what we think would be an ideal sort of timeline, because this is what a lot of like travelers, they're like, okay, I get it. Like I got to get a license, but like when you're actually in the moment, you're like, should I get this one, or at what point should I start applying for this one? And because it's kind of tricky, like you're working your first job and you're like, when do I start looking for new jobs, and when do I start getting new licenses?
Yep.
So we sort of recommend what's worked well for us and we think is good for others. Get your first license in your home state, take your first job in your home state or in a neighboring state. So you're already licensed, hopefully in your home state. Then once you're at your first job, go ahead and start thinking about where you want your next job. Pick a state that has a lot of job opportunities. So don't pick Utah or somewhere that
specifically in the setting that you want, if that's important for you. So we are always looking for outpatient jobs. So we're looking for states that not only have a lot of jobs, but have a lot of outpatient jobs.
Right.
So pay attention to that.
So the way that we judge that is we talk to the recruiters, and they can pull up lists of like previous jobs they've had in a state, or they can pull up the current jobs they have in a state. So just because, say you're starting your first job in March, and you know that in 3 months you're going to want a new job in a new state, well, maybe the jobs that are available on their list in March aren't the jobs that you're going to apply for, because that's too soon. But it gives you an idea of how many jobs kind of tend to be in that state. So that's how we ended up picking Massachusetts as our second state, because we were just like, well, we want to go to New England, but we don't care where. But Massachusetts had a lot of jobs. And
that wasn't our first choice. We wanted to be ideally in Maine. That's Maine or New Hampshire. Mm-hmm. But then we looked at the list of jobs, and our likelihood of finding specifically 2 outpatient jobs in Maine or New Hampshire was very low. So instead, we were like, oh, Massachusetts at the time had as many jobs as all the other states in the Northeast combined. So we had to get licensed there. It made sense for us, and there was like 5 or 6 open outpatient jobs when we looked. So that worked out very well. We had no gaps. We went straight from one job right to that one.
Yep. So while you're on your current contract, go ahead and start thinking about where you want your next state to be. Try to pick a state that tends to have a good amount of jobs. Then hopefully your travel company can help you with that next license already while you're on contract with them, and you can go ahead and get the ball rolling. And then hopefully by the time you're coming up on like 4 weeks left at the end of your current contract, you'll already be licensed in that next state, and you can already be applying for jobs with license in hand. That's the ideal setup and the ideal route that we think works best for most people.
Yeah, another thing to mention, like I was saying, you want to have the license first to avoid missing weeks of work. The other thing is some jobs won't even consider you if you don't have your license already. Mm-hmm. So, because they don't want to run into that situation. Maybe they've had that situation like we ran into in the past, where everything was thrown off for 2 weeks because the traveler didn't get licensed in time. So they don't want to have that situation. They're only going to even look at people that have licenses. So that already limits your options. So we think it's much better to have the license first.
Yep.
Emma, we'll definitely send you that list. And Penny, thanks for joining.
Yeah. If anybody else is joining in, I see there's a few new people tuning in. If you're joining in, just say hey in the comments and let us know you're here. Also, if you have any questions, if you guys have questions that we haven't covered about licensing or specific questions about your situation, feel free to comment or send us a message and let us know.
Yeah, and if you're watching on the replay, same thing. Ask questions. We'll always go back and answer them.
Yep. So this has kind of all been sort of general as far as licensing goes for all disciplines, kind of the process and how it works. We want to talk a little bit next about the PT Compact. So this is specific to physical therapists and physical therapist assistants. So if anybody's tuning in and knows what the PT Compact is, let us know. Give us maybe a emoji or a thumbs up or something. I think Lauren's tuning in. I think Lauren is very well aware of the PT Compact. It's becoming more well known. So what the PT Compact is a compact licensure that the Physical Therapy Association has started to put together, and it's making PTs and PTAs eligible. Unfortunately, there's not one right now for OT or SLP, but hopefully in the future they'll get one. So the compact means that once you're licensed in one state that's a member of the compact, you should be able to very easily basically streamline the process to go ahead and get licensed in another state that is also in the compact.
Yeah, so instead of going through that entire checklist we laid out earlier of 8 or 9 things that needs to happen, and as in addition to paying all the fees that are associated with all those things, maybe if you have the compact license, it only costs you $20 for an application and you're licensed, within a couple days. So it'd be just a much abbreviated process of everything that we laid out there.
So in order to be eligible for the PT Compact, this is a big thing that people don't understand. So we recommend you check out the website ptcompact.org, I think it is, or just type in PT Compact in Google and it'll come up. You want to look at the map of the states that are participating, and there's different colors. They're labeling it by the different stages currently. So there's places where they've introduced legislation, they're starting to talk about it. There's states where they've approved the legislation, but they have not started issuing actual licenses yet. And then there's states that they have actually started issuing compact privileges. So the ones that have already started issuing compact privileges, I think it's probably like 15 now or so.
Yeah, somewhere around there.
If you're a member of one of those states, it has to be your home state, and you have to be licensed there.
Yeah, so we would love it if we could just so we're actually 2 of the states involved right now, North Carolina and Arizona, we're licensed in those states. But those aren't our home states, so that means that we still can't get the compact license because our home state's Virginia, and Virginia, even though they've approved legislation, they haven't started issuing licenses yet.
Right.
So we're waiting on Virginia to go ahead and move through that. But yeah, it has to be your home state. It can't just be a state that you get licensed in.
Yeah.
As great as
and
that would be.
we get that question all the time. So it has to be your home state, and you have to be licensed there, and you have to have your license in good standing and all that good stuff. So Virginia, our home state, has approved it, but they haven't started issuing it yet. So once our home state, Virginia, switches to dark blue or whatever the color is on the map, we're going to do a happy dance, because then we will be eligible to very easily and quickly get a license in all the other member states just like that. So you still have to do a short application and a fee, because like Lauren said, it's all about the money. They want your money. But the huge thing is you don't have to get the verifications from all your other states. You don't have to get the verifications from your school. You don't have to get the verifications from the board. You just have to do the application and the fee, and if they do have a jurisprudence, you still have to take that.
Yeah.
So the compact is huge, and it's super exciting for PTs and PTAs. Hopefully all 50 states will get on board, in the coming months. But right now, I think at least 15, I'm pretty sure it's around 13 to 15, have fully approved it. And then I think there's another 15 that have approved it but haven't actually started issuing privileges yet.
Yeah, and this will make, once more and more states join, this will make travel therapy so much easier, or travel PT at least.
Yeah.
Because that's always been one of the biggest hassles for us. So if we could easily be able to just get licensed in, there's a lot of states out west that are involved in the compact. If we could just easily get licensed in those states and be able to take a job there within a week or 2, that would be really, really nice.
Yeah.
So
that one job that comes up in Utah one
Yeah.
time, because that's in the compact, we'll take it.
Yeah.
We kind of alluded to that earlier. So if you are talking about where to get your first license, if your home state is a member of the compact, you better get your first license in your home state, because that is a huge benefit.
Yeah.
Some people also talk about could I switch my home state so that my home state could be, one of the ones that's part of the compact? Maybe, but this looks into a different issue, the tax home issue. So you really want to nail down your tax home and make sure it's legit. You can't just say I'm going to change my address.
Yeah.
To a compact state. That was easy. It's not that easy, but it's possible. If you actually wanted to move to a new state and establish that as your tax home in North Carolina, say that's a compact state, then yes, you could do that, but there's a lot more that goes into it.
And we've certainly considered that, and we still might do that in the future if Virginia doesn't go through with it in the next several months. But yeah, you definitely have to make sure that you follow all the rules for changing your tax home.
Yep. So that's mostly what we wanted to cover tonight. If anybody has any questions, we'd love to hear from you in the comments. Again, if you tuned in and you got value out of this, if you learned something, if you enjoyed watching our silly faces talk, if you would just click the like button, click the heart button, Share this, tag a friend. If you guys have friends that are PTs, OTs, speech therapists, assistants that are interested in getting to travel, if you just want to tag them in this video so they can learn more about licensing and how the ins and outs and how it works. If you guys want that information for the PTs that are watching, if you want that information about licensing, I have a list of the different times that it takes to roughly get each license in each state. If you just want to comment below and let me know, I can send that to you. So next week
we're going to be in Prague in the Czech Republic. So we're planning on doing this video next week on Sunday, as long as the Wi-Fi is good.
Sunday the 21st.
As long as the Wi-Fi is good in our Airbnb, which hopefully it will be, because we're going to be there.
In a hotel.
No, Prague. No? We're going to be there for 7 days in Airbnb, so hopefully it'll be good there. We're going to be talking about another topic we get a lot of questions on, which I'm surprised. We're 20-some videos in, and we still have topics to talk about. The question we get a lot is traveling as an independent contractor, not going through a travel company. I don't know how many times this has come up in the last couple months. So it's something I want to talk about. I'm planning to write an article about that this week as well, so we might release an article with some numbers along with the video at the same time, just to be able to make it a little bit easier to reference, because sometimes I get into talking about specific numbers and doing calculations and things, and I think people get lost on that. So if there's like actually laid out in a blog post, it may be a little easier. So anyway, we're going to talk about that.
So next week we'll be coming at you from Prague, and we'll be talking about being an independent contractor and what that means. So let us know if you guys are interested in hearing more about that. We'd love to hear from you.
Yep. But thanks for tuning in. If you can like this video, if you're watching on the replay and you have questions,
give us a hashtag replay.
Yeah, feel free to ask any questions you have. We'll come back to the video, answer that. Feel free to reach out to us with any questions. And if you want that, the PDF, the list of licenses, how long it takes to get licensed in each state, just comment below.
All right, guys. Thanks for tuning in.
See you later.
Night.